All right. So, welcome to Meet Our Members. My name is Geese, and I'll be your host for the next hour, along with my bald spot, which you'll be able to see a lot on that screen. So, we're both here. Before we begin, I want to do a couple administrative odds and ends. First off, any new members or samplers in the room?
Yeah, we have one.
We have one?
John is a new member.
I have not, yes, I'm new member, but I have not got tagged yet.
And your name?
John Lu.
John Lu, new
Yeah,
member. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Anybody on Zoom? We're good? Okay. I'm going to ask that you hold your questions till the end, because there'll be a lot of opportunity at the end to kind of just wrap it all up, and that's when we'll field some questions. So for today, oftentimes we'll have two guests during the hour. Today, we're lucky to have one guest because he's done so much that we'll be able to really kind of roll up our sleeves and get into his work and everything about Bob. So we're lucky. So I'll go about 40 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for questions. Of course, if you're on Zoom, you know to mute yourself, right? And then unmute yourself when you talk, and then mute yourself back again when you're done. For those in the room, if you've got your cell phones, make sure they're on silence for this session. And of course, we're recording this, so if anybody wants to listen to it again, you can. All right, so today it's my pleasure to introduce to you my guest, our guest, Bob Barancik. Bob, welcome.
Oh, thank you.
Now, Bob, so you were a former member of ASPEC, then you left and you came back. Was it because you missed us?
Oh, that was it. I actually did, and that is quite true. I had a little bit of a storied career here. I'm a Rip Van Winkle. About 5 or 6 years ago, I was going to join when I was in my late 60s, then had some health problems, had to stop for about 2 years, then joined again, and I was a member for about 1.5 years, and then the COVID hit. And both my wife and I are diabetics, and both of us have, I would say, significant conditions around the disease. So COVID is not a good thing for us. So this is my first time out doing anything social in 3.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's a little bit strange because I always, am I seeing viruses in the room or not? But we've had our shots and so on, and I actually did miss ASPEC that much. I had a very, very interesting life in Maine and in Philadelphia and in the Bay Area of San Francisco, and always knew fascinating people, and not having the ASPEC connection really hurt. And I said, well, I'm going to chance it. I'm going to use good sense, but one never knows. And so here I am, and I'm looking out at this, and it's like stunning me. You know what I mean? I forgot how beautiful it was, and particularly with Tony Terra landscaping the place, that looks even better when you come in here. So
good.
I am here.
Well, welcome back. Welcome back.
Yeah.
I'm going to just highlight some of your bio, and then we'll kind of get into some of it. All right. Okay. You are an award-winning painter, printmaker, and video producer. You founded and direct the Creative Share website and studio. You received your MA from Stanford University and dual degrees in fine arts and architecture from Rhode Island School of Design. Your mixed media paintings and prints have been exhibited at numerous museums and galleries across the country, including the Frye Museum in Seattle, the Minnesota Museum of American Art, New Jersey State Museum, the New York Public Library, and the Maine Medical Center in Portland, Maine, just to name a few. Your award-winning videos have been screened at film festivals all over the country, too many to cite here, and we'll get into some of those awards that you got. You have served on advisory boards, including the Watchman Fund for International Education, the Middle East Council of Philadelphia, and Creative Tampa Bay. and you have lectured at New York University, Long Island University, the University of California, and Moore College of Art and Drexel University. And lastly, you and your wife, Amy, who also works with you, divide your time between your studios in St. Pete, Philadelphia, and Portland. How'd I do?
Oh, God, it makes me tired.
Now, speaking about the awards, I'm just going to rattle off cross sample just so you get an idea of the skill that this man has contributed. All right, you have won awards from the Gasparilla International Film Festival, the Canada International Film Festival, the Tucson Music Film Festival, the Maine International Film Festival, Napa-Simona Wine Country Film Festival, the Maryland Film Festival, the Washington, D.C. Independent Film Festival, Ybor City Festival, Rochester International Film Festival, Berkeley Video and Film Festival, Tokyo Video Festival, Santa Barbara International Film Festival, Hungarian Multicultural Center, 5th Film Festival, and I'm just scratching the surface, Toronto Jewish Film Festival, Columbia International Film Festival, Philadelphia International. Bob, would it be fair to say that your life's work has had an impact around the world?
No, no, I don't think so, but I like to think so. You know, it's hard to say. I have some interesting stories around that. One never knows, particularly in this video, or not video, digital world.
Mm-hmm.
One never knows exactly what's going to happen. I had a two-sided rowboat up in Maine. It's called the Maine Pea Pod, and it was a traditional boat that lobstermen used and cod fishermen used. And I did a video about it. And I didn't think anybody would be interested, but I just loved my little boat. And I did a video, put it up on YouTube. And I never looked at it for about 12 years. And I did it 14 years ago. 22,000 people played it. I mean, who in heck would know something like that? Who would be interested in a rowboat? So one never knows.
Well, let me ask you this, because you've done a lot of things and we'll get into them, but how has it impacted you? How has your work impacted you?
It's a really strange thing is that it was a life that I didn't really want, that the ego certainly didn't want. My father was a well-known architect, and many of you may have seen his obituary. He was the last living monument man. He passed away just before 99 in Chicago, and he was a fine artist and architect, and my mother was a gifted painter, and both grandmothers were gifted painters. Mm-hmm. So I had these genes that were a little too intense, but that was what I got. The men in the family were all medicine and mathematics, and I just got the other ones. So I would have rather been something else, but who I was is who I was, and always knew that this is what I would have to do. And you know, you make it just how it works out with its little upsy downsies in life. Yeah.
Do you feel like throughout your career you stayed true to yourself?
Not always. No, not always. I took the degree in architecture basically to please my grandparents. That was what I did. Mm-hmm. And then I ended up to earn a living. Became a father relatively late in life at 35. So I had to use my skills. So I, promoted, worked for DuPont, doing auto varnish, all sorts of things. And my wife and I had actually a pretty successful studio in Philadelphia for about 20 some odd years. And we worked in the medical fields. It was something I had no particular interest in, but the money was there, and and did that. So I wouldn't say that I was necessarily true to myself. I did what I had to do, and as I got older, I returned more to myself.
Yeah, when I read off all these awards, was there one video that you shot that received the majority of awards?
Yes, for those of you who are statistically oriented, Pareto's Law, absolutely. that 20% of what one does garners 80% of the attention. Absolutely. And I ended up, I won't say famous, but in my little world for post-Holocaust videos. And that was a completely accidental career. It wasn't something that I chose, it was something that I ended up having to do around, well, it's a very sort of painful thing. In 1991, the American Jewish Committee sent me and some other people to Israel to learn the political situation and all that, to be able to bring that back to our communities. Then right after that, I had a consulting job up in Telluride. So last place I was in Israel was the Dead Sea, which, as we all know, is the lowest part of the world. And then I had the consulting job up in Telluride, which was one of the higher places. And I was up hiking and mountain climbing at 14,000 feet, and I had a stroke. And yeah, and I was 41 years old. Life was, although it wasn't necessarily true to myself, I was, by conventional standards, a very successful person. And then I had the, it actually turned out to be a cerebral event, and went through all the different things. I ended up as a subject of NASA research because they'd never seen dizziness like the kind and vestibular sensations I had. So anyway, I was a subject of NASA research at Harvard. And apparently, I don't know that this is true, but this is sort of what they told me, or at least as I understand it, that my situation helped them redesign fighter pilot cockpits. But I used that to give the events some meaning, and to one degree or another. But I was incapacitated for a full 5 years at the height of my abilities. And the sensations I had were unbelievable. And you know, when you're told by the people at Mayo's and Johns Hopkins and of course at Mass General, there's nothing we can do for you. You're on your own. And I couldn't lie down for 2 years. I was also told I could not fly. So my grandparents on my mother's side were great world travelers. I mean, unbelievable world. And I was hoping, you know, in my later to do the same thing. So I've not been able to. I was the last thing the doctor from NASA told me. Said no airplanes, no airplanes. Live as close to sea level as you can. And that's what one of the things that brought me to Florida and to Maine, so I could live at sea level. And I was when one sort of loses one's initial career, I didn't know what to do. And I said, this was 91, 92 sort of thing. My wife said, well, maybe you could make some videos. I said, well, I don't know, I've never done that. So I started, and this was before all the computer stuff. In making videos using linear technology was tremendously expensive and tremendously difficult. And they see this sort of guy. So when I'd go to help, you know, go to different production houses, I, of course, would be cheated every time. But when you have no real choices, the idea my wife had was that, well, you can't travel, but these things can. But this was long before the web or anything like that. So I started, and I had what was almost, I'm not a religious person, but it was really a moment of grace or something. I had pretty much given up because I kept getting cheated. The largest production house in Philadelphia was something called Center City Film and Video. And if you are an insomniac, you have seen their work. They do all this stuff at midnight that's on the thing about, you know, car varnishes and, you know, and all that kind of stuff. But they were very advanced in terms of their technology. There's something called Avid, for some of you who know what that is. That was the first non-linear things where you were really using digital to create this stuff. And the suites were quite expensive. They were $56,000 in the 1990s, which was expensive, but it was a lucrative line of work. So I show up there, I just walk in, and there was a woman of sort of a certain age. She looked exactly like what you would see on Beach Drive here. She, of a certain age, she knew how to do her hair and, how to dress and just enough make, just lovely, somewhat older woman. And I said, look, I want to make videos. And what kind do you want? I said, well, it's a little strange. It'll be with Holocaust theme. I said, all right. Turns out it was her husband owned the place. So, okay, we'll talk to you. Turns out she was the great-granddaughter of the Kotzker Rebbe, who was one of the great Jewish rabbis of Poland. She and her family were among the very few Jews that survived the Holocaust in Poland. And okay, so we started. And he put me together with a guy named Kozlov, obviously a Jewish guy. And he had a real sort of feeling for it. We started making the things, and we were trying to say it was really good production. Turns out it was either his uncle or great uncle was at Auschwitz. He had the job when they incinerated the Jewish bodies. He would take the skulls and take the molten fillings out. So I had hit a place where there was resonance for what I was doing. And we started, the first ones actually weren't so hot. But the name Barancik in Polish means little ram. It's a pejorative term for blockhead. And my main thing is I just don't give up. I just don't give up. My middle name should be tenacity. And so we kept at it. And like anything else, you stay at it. And it was very difficult, the process of doing, entering contests, because you had to make these, you remember the VHS cassettes? You had to make those things. And then you had to send them. And this was before, these were Olivetti typewriters. You didn't have the thing, so, typing out all the things. If you make a mistake, you have, type the thing out again. So it was a real thing. But I eventually started to get some recognition. And it's like anything, it's Pavlovian. You're a nobody, and then all of a sudden you're getting some recognition, some stroke. Well, you do it some more. And then I kept doing it, and I did something different. My wife and I were the first studio in Philadelphia to use Apple computers. When I was at Stanford, I knew a lot of the people that had went on to create the revolution, the world we live in now, before it was the world. I knew Bill Verplank, who went on to run Paul Allen's Interval Lab, for those of you that are familiar with that. And I knew a lot of those people. I knew how smart they were. So I was not hesitant to do the technology. And this was before my incident. And this, sort of went through, and I was able to talk people into it. And so I was attuned to this thing, and I was able to move with the digital revolution, and I'd sort of lost where I was going. I had an idea, and that was to animate my flat art using a mechanical arm with a video camera. Mm-hmm. This is, of course, done very, very cheaply. Now, with all kinds of just software, you can do all kinds of animation. So what we would do is we'd lie my art down, and a camera would swoop over it instead of a bottle of, car cleaner or something, whatever. It would go over my art, and we'd animate it. So it made my art unusual. And like everything else, other people caught up, but I had the advantage of being a little bit ahead of the curve. So the work started getting shown places, and that was interesting. And I had a lot of peculiar experiences. One of my videos was on Raoul Wallenberg. Are any of you familiar with him? Yeah. He was a Swedish diplomat who saved, depending on how you counted, between 10,000 and 100,000 Hungarian Jews, which were the last part of the Holocaust. Any rate, so it was being shown at Toronto, a Jewish film festival. And you may know that Toronto is the world capital for documentary filmmaking. It has been for a long time. So it was, and they were showing the film, and then another woman, hard to say, might have been in her 50s, 60s, I don't know. Tall, she looked German or German or Swedish. Tall, and she came up and said, "Oh, that was him." I said, "That was who?" She said, "Well, that was Wallenberg." And I said, "How do you know?" She said, "Well, I was his secretary." And he was, of course, went out to greet the Soviet troops when they were coming into Budapest, and was taken off to Lubyanka prison and then shot, a number of years later. But it made me feel good. I said, "Well, I must have done something right. I hit something of the man."
You found an angle to produce art that hadn't been done before, which gave you a lot of attention. Well, let me go back to, because what led to this was you were talking about you got ill. Like, how did you get through those 3 or 4 years?
Well, it hasn't been 3 or 4 years. It's actually been 33 years now.
Okay.
It's my wife. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would have given up. I probably would have died. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about her.
She went to the Rhode Island School of Design. It was a very small school when I was there. We were there. I was there in the late 60s. She's 2 years younger. And it was very small. It was 900 students, undergraduate, maybe 200 graduate students. So everybody knew each other. And at the time, she was 2 years. Her year was the most difficult year to get in. It was 14-1. And the women were extraordinary. RISD was one of the few schools, one of the very few schools where women could study architecture at the time. I mean, you think it's ridiculous now, but back then, a woman, no matter how good she was, could not get into Cornell or MIT. Just so. But RISD was always a peculiar little place, very peculiar. So they would accept women. So the women, many of them, I mean, were really brilliant. And one of the sort of the secrets was that the women's SATs were higher than the men's at Brown. Yeah, they're very smart. My wife was very, very smart. Her dad was very, very high at the CIA, which was very unusual for a Jewish man, very unusual. And they did it by, she was raised Unitarian. That was how it made that possible. And she was really gifted and really smart. She had enough credits to graduate a year early, but they wouldn't let her. And she was always very frugal and very hardworking. So she graduated with like $3,000 in cash. She always had part-time jobs. And she was in the illustration department, and my girlfriend at the time was also in the illustration department. But we didn't know each other. But our favorite professor at RISD was the person who taught the introductory design course. He was a tool and die maker. And at any rate, it's a long story. We met in New York. I had broken up with my girlfriend. I was sort of at loose ends, so I thought I'd get a job. And she interviewed me for the job. She was leaving, so she did the interview. At any rate, one thing led to another. We were married in 9 months. Wow. There was so much in common, having had that experience at RISD. My sister went to RISD right after I did. I was graduating, then she went in. Right. It was a different school. It was wide open, crazy place when I was there. And then it went back like Brown to a much more focused commercial kind of thing. I had also started at Brown and then transferred to RISD after 2 weeks. My father was not too happy about that, but.
So back to your wife.
Yeah.
How has she influenced you or your work?
Well, she was always been my editor and art director. Our first project was something called Graffito Folio. It was a letterpress. It was like Ben Franklin's, type printing. And she edited my art, directed all the work, and then edited all the poems. And the piece is in the rare book room at the New York Public Library. This was 1982. That was our first project. So basically, whatever success I've had in life, I really very much owe to her. I would not be anywhere near the artist or writer that I.
So it's a real team inside and out.
True partnership, soulmate. I would actually say, yeah.
You mentioned, this is related to an earlier comment, on the Art Not Hate website, that you are a descendant of Warsaw Jews and a family that lost members in the Holocaust. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, actually, part of the family, it's a little bit somewhere in Warsaw. Other part of the family were in Vilnius, which is Lithuania. Others were in Ukraine, Berdichev, which is outside of Kiev, and then Odessa. On the Black Sea.
Right.
All the groups that got completely wiped out. So but I was raised completely secular. And when you're young, and your life can change in very peculiar ways. The girlfriend I had in RISD was one of her ancestors was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. Her father was a line naval officer. Completely, definitely not a Jewish thing. And I didn't really think about it. And I went, RISD had a lot of interesting things happening. There was always people speaking. A man named Roman Vishniak, I don't know if that means anything to anybody here.
Photographer.
Yeah, was having a free lecture, and that was basically what I could afford. And Vishniak was a polymath. He was one of the few wealthy Russian Jewish families. They had the Royal Commission for parasols and umbrellas. And he was a polymath. He could do anything. He spoke 3 or 4 different languages, brilliant zoologist, biologist, mathematician, photographer. Among other things, he was the one who developed stop photography, catching the bee in motion and all that kind of stuff. He was getting one of his PhDs in Berlin, and people told him, this was, the late 30s, the Jews are not going to, the war's coming, there's going to be not a Jew surviving the war. So through a long source of stories, he got the American Jewish Committee to let him go through the world, the shtetls, and even the cities of Eastern Europe and Russia to document the Jewish communities before they're going to be wiped out, which he did not share with the communities, what was going to happen to them. Most of it, he took thousands of photos. Only, I think, about 300 survived. They were buried. They ended up buried somewhere in France. They made it through the war. And they got, so, at any rate, I saw his photographs, and they all looked like my relatives. I mean, they had the things, and he dressed up, but the faces were identical.
What format was he shooting?
I'm sure it was a Leica.
Okay.
Because that's all there was, and it was small, and that was what was carried. And it stunned me. It stunned me, and didn't know what to really make of it. And it sort of went, but it sort of thought. I was like 20 years old, but then it came up when I was living in Berkeley. It started to come up again. I started to get interested in things Jewish. So there's something called the Magnus Museum for those. It was a Jewish museum actually in Oakland. And I went there, and there was a pretty woman who was the receptionist. So we ended up setting up, a relationship. And her father was one of the founders of Israel. He was one of Ben Gurion's right-hand men. And she had just gotten out of the Israeli Air Force. Her boss was one of the top Mirage pilots, which basically saved the country in '67. Anyway, so that opened up a whole thing. I became very close with.
Well, is that where you're getting a lot of your inspiration from?
Yeah, he was a fellow, I must have mentioned it, Ralph Goldman. He just died in the last couple of years. He lived to about 104. I had never seen someone animated by religious fervor. Never. We're secular Jews. Religious fervor, what the hell's that? I'd never seen that before. And then I ended up meeting people around him that built the state really from nothing. And they brought in 800,000 Jews called Marathi Jews, who were Jews from the Levant, who'd been there, but they were thrown out in 48 after Israel, and then 1 million Russian Jews. And just to see people of such confidence, such because nothing really meant anything to me. You have the ego thing, well, you try to get rich, you try to get famous, try to do whatever, but I'd never seen anybody animated like this with a sense of purpose.
Mhm.
And it was transformative, where the whole object of my family was to assimilate Protestantism about as fast as one could do it. So it was those just random events. One of my favorite books is The Drunkard's Walk. It's called How Randomness Rules Everyday Life, and how things happen. She didn't work every day, had she not been there. How things happen. It's almost a tale told by an idiot, but there it is, how things happen. And yeah. And I became friends with, at the time, my girlfriend and Ralph's son. He was the deputy Israeli consulate in Argentina. He was blown up in Argentina about 20 years ago. And
So, well, let me ask you this. Okay, so all that inspired you and created passion and sadness and all these mixed. How did you turn that into art?
something happened, and it's nothing I chose to create. My senses of stuff passing through me. I had a studio in Portland, Maine. It was on Long Island, Maine, which was 7 nautical miles off of Portland. It was where the entire North Atlantic fleet was fuel for the liberation of Europe. So obviously, to say the least, that had resonance for me. But my artwork that was passing through me was just, I think the best artwork I have done has been here in Florida. And there's nothing really to, no visceral connections to Eastern Europe, especially that time frame. But it's something that started to pass through me. There is stuff that's apparently scientifically legitimated, that DNA gets changed by trauma. Mm-hmm. And apparently that is turning out to be very much true. And I do think that there is that part that had been repressed by the family was somehow inside me. I didn't know my father was a monument man until I was 60-some years old. That part was, I didn't know that my father guarded people who had perpetrated the Holocaust after the Second World War. All that stuff was very much repressed.
Now you have work displayed in the Florida Holocaust Museum.
Well, that was another peculiar thing. Right before my 40th birthday, I went to the Vermont Studio Center that had been started by a friend of mine who had been the dean of the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. It was the first year or two. So I went there. I was 39. It was right before my 40th birthday. And stuff started coming out of me. I was in this little room. They didn't have a real studio for us. They had a little room. So for like 2 weeks, I sort of holed up, and the stuff started coming. Just came out.
Like what stuff?
All Holocaust-related stuff about it. It was beyond misery. And it was a very strange thing. You're in New England, so you don't think there's any Jews around. And everybody else was an assimilated Jew there too. And they were, and they would ask me, well, what are you doing? I'm just doing stuff. I said, oh, you think you're better than everybody else? You're not going to show? Okay, so I show it. Then everybody else started going crazy because it hit that chord within them. So I did all this work, and some of them were made into books. At any rate, apparently they had heard about this, and there was a show in Europe. It was supposed to be a show in Europe that and I was invited. But then there was so much underground and visceral anti-Semitism in Europe that the show, of course, was canceled, and that was the end of that. But a couple of years later, I was contacted by someone who had been involved with it, a fellow named Steve Feinstein, who organized something called Witness and Legacy, which was a contemporary artists, Jewish artists' response to the Holocaust. And it was the largest show of its kind. And I was in that, and my work traveled to all these museums for about 7 years with great artists, a man named Lasansky, great Florida, in Iowa, Larry Rivers.
Can you describe what one of your favorite pieces to give an image of what it might be? Or a couple of them?
It's hard to say. I don't really know. I'm working on right now, I always like to say, is that I was stunned by what happened, the massacre. I had been working on a series. There was a very famous photograph, a historical photograph of a young old woman leading young Jews into the gas chambers from Auschwitz, a very iconic photo. And then I did, in the last year and a half, I did maybe 20 pieces of art inspired by that. And then after 10/7, I was frozen for about a month. And then I started taking work that I had done with this and mixed it with the images of 10/7. And my wife, who's always worked with it, I showed her some of my recent work, and she just burst into tears. And just, so I won't say it's my favorite, but I just sort of continuing with what is what, and sort of staying with it. The one thing about an artist, I never considered myself a painter or a writer or any of that stuff. I said, I sometimes do painting, the verb form. I sometimes do writing. Otherwise, I don't really identify this as a career or calling. It just, I actually tried to stop doing all this because I was really blessed. 11 and a half months ago, our daughter provided us with a grandson, first and only grandchild, and it's been a source of joy. And I said, well, now with this little guy, be happy. And I am happy, just accept. But this trying to repress doing this stuff is harder than actually doing it.
Yeah.
But I guess if you want to say a thing, I've been working with the Polish, the Warsaw Uprising over 20 years, and I put that together as a very large body of work about it. And it's very relevant about how one must continue to resist, even if you're doomed. And that is a very important, I believe, a very important lesson.
Yeah. Of all the websites that you have, which is the best one for people to see examples of your
Well, this
work?
is sort of a funny story in a ironic kind of way. I chose Art Not Hate. I was one of the first people to set up websites in the country. I was always an early adapter to stuff. But even then, when I started up, it's very easy to come up with real catchy names for your website, really easy. But it's hard to come up that wasn't taken. And out of desperation, I said, Art Not Hate. So I've had that for 20 or 30 years. And I didn't know much about it, but I wanted to optimize it. So it's a long story. I got in contact with someone who'd been at Swarthmore, which is a wonderful little school outside of Philadelphia. But he was at the MIT Sloan School, the business school. Anyway, he was an expert on websites, supposedly. This was maybe 8 or 9 years ago. So he came down here to help me optimize things. He said, did you know that you had 100,000 people a year visiting your website and staying about 3.5 to 4 minutes? I had no idea. He said, well, we're going to do better. So I had the guy from MIT help me. And now I get 2,000 to 3,000 visits. So I believe what had happened, the people who had set up the original website had gone to East Stroudsburg University. They're just, young hipsters. But they had done something in optimizing the search functions. In fact, I'm sure that's what it was. So anybody who hit Holocaust ended up there. But when we redid the site, we lost whatever was deeply embedded in there. So I I do not
Yeah.
get anywhere near the.
Now, you had talked about wanting to create some programs for ASPEC.
Yes, I did, and I kept trying to connect to Sue Hoffman, and that's quite a story there. The connection that Sue went to the University of Pennsylvania. Amy and I were in Philly a long time, 30-some years, and we know that whole lawyer thing. But she had gone to Lake Forest College, which is right by where I grew up, and my rabbi taught the anthropology course. It just all these crazy little. Anyway, I haven't quite been able to connect with her, but I will preempt it so Ed here can let her know. I'd always been very interested in future studies for a lot of reasons. I was in California when a lot of the modern world was done. One of the people I knew was Willis Harman, who was one of the greatest futurists in this country. He wrote a book called An Incomplete Guide to the Future. It was published 75, but it came out of research that was done in the late 60s, early 70s. They basically, when you look at the book, they basically hit everything. Energy, financial crisis, just one thing after another. They just hit it, one thing after another. And I think it's worth looking at that book again.
Okay.
And there's another book by a University of Pennsylvania professor named Philip Tetlock, Super Forecasting. Anybody familiar with that? It was a New York Times bestseller. What he did a lot of research. He was a statistician. He's at the Wharton School, the business school. And he looked at the accuracies of prognostication of experts on economic, political matters. What they found is that lay people are more accurate in actually doing predictions, accurate predictions. So one of the things I wanted to do was to go through Willis's stuff and potentially some other ones, but to also, Tetlock has stuff online if we wanted to do this and get into the futures thing. But I was hoping in early January for those that were interested, and hopefully we'll get some help with people who know more about statistics and other things, develop questions and questionnaires. What will, in January of 2025, will the S&P be? Will there be more wars there? Will Putin be there? Will Ukraine, all the basic things. And it'd be sort of fun to see who are the super forecasters in the group. So I thought that would that would be fun. I did a project when I was in Maine 13 years ago with a fellow named Dr. Abe Peck. Abe is one of the top American historians on contemporary Germany, and he's an expert on Wagner. He actually did a book with Wagner's great-grandson or something. His parents survived the Holocaust in Łódź, which was a Jewish center. And amazing, he was born in a DP camp and came here. It's a long story. Anyway, we met in Maine. His wife was from Maine and dragged him back there. And we did something, several parts, but one of it was, I never believed the polls saying that there was low anti-Semitism in this country. I was a complete skeptic on this because I felt they were asking the wrong questions, people weren't. So what I did was, Maine has always traditionally been extremely anti-Semitic, deeply anti-Semitic state for a lot of reasons, better now. But there's also been Jews in Maine since the 1860s. They came in with the lumber industry. So at any rate, one part of the thing was anti-Semites, great anti-Semites of the 20s and 30s. And that was Henry Ford, Charles Lindbergh, Kennedy, Father Coughlin, I'm forgetting the fifth one. Anyway. At any rate, his wife was a very distinguished editor. So I had them write about the times, the zeitgeist, and then about each of the characters. And then I interviewed Abe about these people. And Abe was, his last job was at St. Leo's. He was running the Jewish Christian Dialogue Center. So.
And what would you do with this? Would this become?
I put it up just on the web.
Okay.
I just put it up on the web, and nothing, I don't know if anything really happened to it. But what it is that he talked about, he agreed with me. That was why I decided to do it. He said, there's a lot of stuff going on
Yeah,
in this country.
yeah,
And his wife edited the stuff. And one of the things I said, that this thing could blow.
yeah,
And obviously it has blown.
yeah.
And that's why I said, I want to start with, it's like anti-Semitism in America, 20s and 30s and today.
Yeah.
So it would be the stuff that I did with Abe. Then the books that I would, the two other books that I would have would be someone else that I crossed paths with. Does Bernard Lewis mean anything to anybody here?
What was that?
Bernard Lewis.
No.
Bernard Lewis is considered the greatest English-speaking scholar of the Islamic world. Right after 9/11, he wrote a book. How it will end, but the thing was Islam meets modernity in the Middle East. It was done immediately after 9/11, explaining the historical roots of 9/11. It's actually, they call it a book, but it's really a series of three longer essays. So I'd like to use that for a discussion, but based on fact rather than I feel this, I think that.
Yeah.
And the other book that's related particularly to the anti-Semitism on American campuses now, which is where most of it is right now, was a book written in '87 by Alan Bloom, The Closing of the American Mind. And the book came out in '87, but it was really in response to his experiences in '67 at Cornell, when things went insane on the campus. And my family has long connections to the University of Chicago, and Bloom is one of those intellects that can grasp and explain.
Yeah.
So that book explains a lot of what's going on right now. So that's another idea.
I want to ask you a final question and then open it up because we're starting to run out of time. But see, this is a teaser anyway, so we're just teasing them.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want your legacy to be? What do you want to be remembered for?
It's almost an obsession. I can give a funny story, but what's so interesting about the story, it's actually true. My mother was an art teacher in suburban Chicago. And this was in the early '80s. She embraced video technology. And she created something called the magic world of art. And she took all the money that she had in the world, because production of video was so very, very expensive. And she created these magic world of art. And there were about 23 videos. And they were really quite interesting. We didn't know what to do with. My mom died in a plane crash in October of '87 or '88, I can't quite remember. And I was the executive. I didn't know what in hell to do with this stuff. And I gave it to the school district where she taught for the last 20 years and forgot about it. And that was pretty much that. And then our daughter was born in '85, and about when she was, died in '88, and this was a couple of years after. My wife's best friend in Philadelphia was a fabulous musician, and she was also a childhood friend from high school. And she had a little daughter about the same age. And she said, well, her friend Janet said, Amy, I know that, that you have a little daughter. I came across these amazing videos by a Mrs. Rima Lowry that your little girl would love. Those were her grandmother's videos. So one never knows where this stuff goes. And I feel about the web and why I put so much effort into it. I don't know what it's going to be, but my hunch is it will be something. And all the artwork that I've done is I'm an obsessive with using archival materials and very, very careful how things are organized. So the way I look at my artwork is that I do it for posterity, although it'll probably be forgotten. But it informs me and inspires me to do the best I can today.
Any regrets?
Yeah, that I had shitty health. I didn't tell you that I almost died of colon cancer. So that was a whole other thing, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's, I'm sorry I had to put my wife through it and now other stuff that I have now. And I'm sorry that my daughter never got to see her father healthy. You know, that's a sad thing.
Yeah. Wow. Well, we're going to open it up for questions. We'll start if there's one in the room. We'll go back and forth with Zoom if we have questions there. Anybody have a question for Bob? Yeah.
I was looking at your website last evening, the one that Geese circulated, and I was really fascinated by your blogs. I read through many of them, but they seem to have stopped. And is that something you have thought about continuing, or I was just curious why they seem to stop?
They do because, yours, thank you. Yours, go. So perceptive. Did you read it on the Graffito Folio website? That's where I keep most of my political blogs. I tend to be something of a perfectionist, which is not a good thing because it tightens you. And if I've had a lot of health issues, over the last couple of years. The energy isn't always there, and I felt if I could not do it at the level I could, I wouldn't do it. And also, too, I did animations with the thing, which are, to do even a small video requires a lot of effort, just a lot of effort. And I did not have the energy. But one of the things I hope to do, particularly the stuff that I wrote on Ukraine, and also the stuff in the videos that I did on from the January 26th insurrection. My great hope here is, when Ken asked me, what do I hope to get out of, this thing, I said, I have modest aspirations here. I hope to make 2 or 3 creative friends and that we can collaborate in some sort of way. And I don't know if that's too high a bar or not, but that is my hope. And that was really back. There's so many people with fascinating backgrounds, fascinating on so many levels here.
Are you done writing those, some of those blogs?
No, I'm starting a huge set on, I haven't figured out quite how to brand it or do it. It's either going to be called the 10-7 Journal, or I'm going to do something called American Converso. Does anyone know what a converso is?
Converso?
Converso?
The person who speaks.
Jews who were persecuted by the Inquisition in Spain went underground. They were nominally Catholics, but they're underground, they were Jews. And they came to Latin America and so on. Right now, there's 200 million people in Latin America with Jewish markers in their DNA. So I'm calling myself an American converso. Most of the time, I pass very much as just a Protestant or whatever, just whatever. So I'm a converso, but I have a deep life other than that. And it's going to be, the tagline, I think, will be something like concealed and revealed Jewish words and art. So I'm going to be doing stuff with that because Jewish history is cyclical. And it has been over for 2,000 to 3,000 years. I'm not sure where we are in the cycle. Well, I do know where we are in the cycle now. And that's what I'm going to be working on.
Any other questions for Bob?
Well, one of the things I might mention is that starting on January 8th, the history group, I'm going to lead the history group in the book Prequel by Rachel Maddow. It's about American fascism in the from the mid-30s to the early 40s, essentially. And all these people you mentioned today, Henry Ford, Charles Coughlin, Lindbergh, and so forth, are featured characters in this book. So it might be
it's all coming together very much.
Might be a volume that could fit within your scheme.
It is that America is different, but history does not repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And I think that's Mark Twain. And we're living through very, very precarious times now. Very precarious. And how things are going to end, no one really knows. But I do feel for us is we have to stand up. We have no other choice.
And you read American Prometheus, I would imagine.
By who?
I can't remember the authors. It's the
Kai Bird, right?
Oppenheimer book that the movie's based on.
No, I didn't. I knew his brother, Frank.
Ah, wonderful family. All New York Jews, Sephardic Jews from the West Side. And ethical culture was a big part of that.
Well, to just go through, my family was deeply connected to the University of Chicago. The University of Chicago was the magnet for the Jewish intellectuals from all of Eastern Europe,
Strauss.
Austria, all of them ended up at the University of Chicago. The Bauhaus ended up at the Illinois Institute of Technology, their Institute of Design. I grew up with those people and around those people. And the 1940s and 50s are much more real to me than actually them right now, and which is good in the sense we're seeing a version of it right now in the country. And be interesting.
Well, I know I speak for people in the room to say welcome back for the third time,
Yeah.
and we're lucky to have you.
And I'm sorry that I hope I wasn't a nudnik, which is someone who talks too much.
No, you were great.
Okay, so.
So thank you, everybody, for participating.
Thank
We'll be
you.
back
Your name is?
Michael Welch.
We met once before.
Yes, I'm
And I'm
sure.
not sure if it was before my hiatus or after, but I know we met.
Yes, yeah, I've also been in the.
You're recording
I said
something, I
obviously
guess.
see.
in May.
Where?
In New York.
Have you been?